안녕하세요. 좋은 하루 보내고 계신가요? 올해 가장 핫한 투자 종목 하나를 꼽으라고 한다면 비트코인을 꼽는 분들이 많으실 거로 생각이 됩니다. 자, 비트코인이 올해 들어 35,000불에서 코인 하나당 73,000불까지 오르면서 비트코인이나 가상화폐 주식에 투자를 하셔서 큰 돈을 버신 분들이 많은 걸로 알고 있는데요. 지금 이 영상을 찍고 있는 4월 11일에 73,000불까지 올랐던 비트코인 가격의 풀백이 오는 데다가 비트코인 할빙이 곧 일어날 것이기 때문에 불안해하시는 분들이 많아졌다는 생각이 듭니다. 그래서 오늘은 비트코인 전문가이자 이 분야에 10년 이상 투자를 해왔고 캐나다에서 최초로 가상화폐 거래소를 만들고 미국에서 Virtual Bitcoin ATM인 코인스트림의 창업자인 마이클 보글을 모셔서 그분의 생각과 인사이트 그리고 2024년에 비트코인의 전망을 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 인터뷰가 역시나 생각보다 길어지는 바람에 2부로 나눠서 영상을 편집하고 번역을 했는데요. 여러분들께서 2024년에 가상화폐나 가상화폐 관련 주식들에 투자를 하는데 조금이라도 도움이 되었으면 하는 바람입니다. 자, 디스클레이머만 듣고 영상 바로 보도록 하겠고요. 이 영상이 많은 분들에게 나눠줄 수 있도록 구독과 라이크 꼭 부탁드리겠습니다. 그리고 지금 같은 마켓에 함께 투자를 하고 싶으신 분들께서는 아래 디스크립션에 페이트리온 링크를 클릭하셔서 함께 했으면 좋겠습니다. 제가 만든 컨텐츠들은 어디까지나 정보 전달을 위한 영상들이기 때문에 절대 영상만 보시고 주식들을 매도하지 마시기 바라고요. 본인 스스로 반드시 리서치를 더 하신 다음에 판단을 내리시기 바랍니다.
Hello, everyone. I'm very excited today to have one of the top leaders in the crypto space, Michael Vogel, founder of Netcoin, one of the largest exchanges in Canada, and also the founder of CoinStream, the US, which is a virtual version of a Bitcoin ATM. Also, with his passion in entrepreneurship, Michael is the founder of Encore Ventures. So, Michael, thank you very much for your time, and it's really great to have you back on my channel.
Awesome to be back. Thanks for having me.
So I'm pretty sure that many investors were excited to see Bitcoin go up from 35,000-ish all the way up to 73,000. But I'm also sure that most investors are wondering what will happen next as we are getting very close to the Bitcoin halving event. Can you share what you see may happen after the Bitcoin halving happens based on your experience going through these past Bitcoin halving patterns that you have seen?
Yeah, what happens with the Bitcoin halving, it's pretty cool. It's almost like a leap year for Bitcoin. Every 4 years, the Bitcoin algorithm auto updates. And basically the reward that miners get for mining Bitcoin is cut in half. So that rate of supply decreases every 4 years. And typically what happens is that results in two things. Most obvious is obviously a supply change, right? So that the rate of new Bitcoins being introduced into the ecosystem is dropped in half. And so what we often will see is this sort of lag effect where due to this reduced supply, either the same amount of demand or what we've seen before is an increased demand will send the price of Bitcoin to all-time highs. And that's what's happened in every previous cycle. So this time around, Bitcoin investors know about this. And so the question is all this priced in? Do we know that the halving's happening? And we know that the price is going to go up. And so is that already priced in? One thing that we noticed this time around is actually Bitcoin has hit an all-time high already. And normally all-time high in previous bull market cycles would happen months after the actual halving event. And so some will say it's priced in. Others will say that it actually might be more dramatic this time around. And the reason being is the people mining Bitcoin are different this time around than in different cycles, right? So if we go back to the beginning, who mined Bitcoin? Well, it was someone with a computer in a basement or someone with a phone or you didn't need a lot to get started. These days, Bitcoin miners tend to be large, sometimes publicly traded companies that are well capitalized, and this is not their first rodeo, right? They know that Bitcoin has the potential to dramatically increase in terms of upside value, and they have different economics than the Bitcoin miners of yesteryear, right? So if we kind of go on a journey back in time, let's say you were mining Bitcoin at home or in an office, or you had a small startup where you were mining Bitcoin, what typically would happen is you would sell off some of your Bitcoin every month to just cover your operational costs. I got to buy computer hardware. I got to pay electricity. That's a big one, just to keep the operation going. And so you'd see that affect the market, right? So new Bitcoins are mined, the miners have these Bitcoins, and then they're pushing them out on the market, right? They're adding this liquidity, they're selling it off. That creates a bit of selling pressure, which can obviously make the price go down if all these miners are selling. But kind of long story short, now that there's a lot of these more, let's call them corporate miners, they may not be as reliant on selling off their Bitcoin inventory to finance their operation. They may already be well capitalized where they're just saying, you know what? We're mining Bitcoin because we want to hold Bitcoin. We believe in the long-term value. And so we're not going to be selling off every month to pay for our operation because we're already capitalized. And so what does that mean? Well, it means less selling pressure, definitely means less inventory because we know due to the halving that there will be 50% fewer Bitcoins mined every block. And so with those things two coupled together, and then actually the third thing, an increased demand, we have the demand through the Bitcoin ETF, basically two factors that are limiting supply, one very big factor that is increasing demand. That could be a very interesting scenario in terms of supply shock and demand shock. So maybe we're not priced in, maybe we're just getting started. And so that's something for investors to think about.
That's really interesting because one thing that I was keeping an eye on is, as you said, for the Bitcoin miners. So if you have the Bitcoin halving event, the rewarding of a Bitcoin goes in half, right? And so I guess if you think about the electricity and the money that goes in, it sounds like the Bitcoin miners might be paying more money or spending more for the electricity in order to get the reward. So I guess my question was, you're saying that now the institutions or the big companies are coming in with a large volume or scale, so they don't have to worry about the cost and they just keep accumulating Bitcoin because they know that the price will go up eventually, right? So usually after a halving event, I think the Bitcoin miners or the Bitcoin mining companies, the stock goes down because, it goes in half, the electricity costs higher and, it's not efficient for them. You're saying that this time it might be a bit different for the Bitcoin mining companies because they're scaling in big volume now and it's not an individual, person in their home office mining the Bitcoins.
Definitely. I think the business case of the past was let's mine all this Bitcoin and a fraction of it, let's sell off every month just to finance our operations. And if we wanted to, we could sell all our Bitcoins tomorrow because that's our business model. There's been enough cycles. Bitcoin is mainstream enough from an investment standpoint that people are aware that Bitcoin has the potential for this massive upside. And so these well-capitalized miners have changed their model where it's like, we want to participate in the Bitcoin ecosystem as well as bet on that long-term appreciation factor. And so there's almost a disincentive to sell your Bitcoin. And without them, the Bitcoin network doesn't exist. So that's important.
Another stock that I wanted to talk about is, of course, Coinbase. And I think it has a different model on how they benefit from the Bitcoin, halving and the demand. But in the case of Coinbase, it's an exchange where after the SEC approving, the Bitcoin ETFs, the big money or institutions will come in and, buy Bitcoin from, I think, Coinbase. And I think they said that 10 out of the 13 ETFs are planning to use Coinbase as their custodians. So I was also wondering what you thought about Coinbase as a stock correlation with the Bitcoin halving in its rally.
I think as far as Bitcoin companies go, Coinbase has a great reputation. Certainly been around for a very, very long time. They're publicly traded. And I think that gives people a lot of comfort when they're choosing to do business with crypto company. So that's a good thing. As you pointed out, Coinbase operating as the custodian for these high profile Bitcoin ETFs is definitely a new model and a very important service because just the BlackRock ETF alone set records for a new ETF in terms of capital inflow. Right? It was the fastest ETF ever to reach $1 billion under assets under management. I think now it's over 10 billion, maybe even 11 billion. And these things only launched in January. So there's been a huge amount of capital inflow. I think in March 2024 alone, I think over $100 billion of trading activity occurred within these ETFs. So it's big volume, it's big business, and Coinbase is positioning itself well to be right in the middle of that storm because I think this ETF model is here to stay, and it's just allowing the possibility for capital that wanted to be in Bitcoin that couldn't enter before can now enter, right? Pension funds, any type of hedge fund that couldn't touch the Bitcoins themselves, they can now buy through an ETF. Coinbase is the custodian. And then that's this new model of how they can participate in Bitcoin.
I think in the last Bitcoin halving cycle, people are saying it was different because the institutions like MicroStrategy or even Tesla, the institutions were coming in and buying Bitcoin as, their asset in their balance sheet. And the big money is kind of getting in, but we didn't have an ETF at that point on the previous cycle. But this cycle, we have the, Bitcoin ETF being approved by the SEC. And as you said, a huge amount of money is coming in. Do you think this time, this halving event cycle will be different because we have now the, Bitcoin ETFs, as you said, we have the general population now having an option to hop onto the investment for cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin. So do you think this time we will have a cycle where we will not see a major crash? Or do you still, anticipate a 80 to 90% crash after, the peak for this cycle?
That's such an interesting question because you're right. As time has gone on, there's more investors in Bitcoin now, there's more liquidity, and the result of that is actually less volatility overall. Still volatility, but less. I remember many months where Bitcoin would drop or increase 50% within 30 days. Right? We haven't seen that type of volatility in years now with Bitcoin. So that is a very noticeable change. And that also, I think, attracts different investors. You mentioned MicroStrategy, a publicly traded company with Bitcoin on their balance sheet, massive amounts of Bitcoin. But I think that lack of volatility or less volatility may pave the way for other companies to just include some of their cash balance to earmark some of that for Bitcoin. I think that definitely makes a logical sense. I'm sure every board is having that discussion of what do we do with our leftover cash, especially in these times, right? With high inflation, the question of Bitcoin as an inflation hedge is definitely full center in a way that has been talked about in the past, but hasn't really been experienced in the Western world.
Another thing is, I think a lot of investors that started to get into cryptocurrencies and, heard about Bitcoin, saw the rally, are thinking that because we went from, let's say, 35,000 to 73,000 within 6 months, a lot of people are thinking that this was the rally and now we're going to get a pullback, and we didn't even have the halving event yet. So from an expert like you, I'd like to hear what you think will happen, whereas, we had a rally for sure, but do you think we're going to have a pullback and then go for the real rally in the next 12, 15 months? Or do you think this was a rally and we're heading down?
조금이라도 도움이 되셨다면 주위 분들과 나눠주셨으면 너무 고맙겠고요. 구독과 라이크를 해주시면 더욱 감사하겠습니다.